In the perspective of a world war, how does someone measure the value of art, especially when human lives were at stake? During World War II, destruction reached new levels in this total war. Humanity's greatest achievements were being destroyed, including sculptures, art, books, and other cultural treasures. A group of civilians, including art historians, artists, and librarians, would cross the frontier, becoming the first civilian soldiers in the creation of the MFAA, the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives program, and eventually the Monuments Men and Women. It was a program of people who volunteered to preserve and protect the cultural treasures of humanity. Throughout history, winners have taken cultural from losers as trophies of spoils of war. The MFAA went into uncharted territory to return art, not to take it. It is still a process that is going on today. Thousands of works of art are still missing. As art empires conquered other places, spoils of war, which included treasures taken by the victors, looting became more of a byproduct of war or an acceptable reason to start one. The Vikings, conquistadors, medieval princes, and later Napoleon all looted on an epic scale. As war raged on across time, the idea of justification of taking treasures from conquered people carried on. Continuing into the 20th century, one early attempt to stop the plunder of cultural treasures was the Second Treaty of Paris in 1783. It attempted to bring an order of tranquility to Europe, but it failed to seize the opportunity to impose protocols for protecting and returning cultural assets. The earliest success in art preservation was in 1899 at the convention, where for the first time in human history it addressed the conduct of the military in times of war and started rules for countries to follow when dealing with cultural heritage. As the world moved on into a more technologically destructive phase through world wars, nations would start noticing that with advanced weapons came more physical destruction of places. Then the question became, can cultural heritage be protected, and if so, at what costs? World War I engulfed numerous countries and numerous different cultures. It would see art taken either by individual people, soldiers, or governments, and most of the time unrightfully so. There were no laws protecting it, and not many outsiders were concerned with art looting. A man who spent time in Europe prior to World War II and knew the value of cultural heritage was George Stout. He was a professor at Harvard and a pioneer in the conservation of works of art, in which he wrote a field manual on the protection of works of art during armed conflict. Stout would work with Paul Sachs, who was the founder of Harvard's Museum Studies course, to create an idea of a group who specialized in art or art history, to send over to battle zones to help preserve and protect cultural heritage of Europe. There were other discussions among American educators and museum staff about the implications of another world war on historic works of art and artifacts. Several groups came together, like an American Defense Harvard group in 1940, and the American Council of Learned Societies, founded in 1919. These American civilians had a deep, passionate concern for what they considered priceless artifacts in Europe. The publicly spoken events wrote to government officials, including the president, and pushed for America to take action in preservation of art. To them, the cultural treasures of Europe were a history of humanity in the Western world. They needed to be protected and preserved for future generations. In 1943, President Franklin D. Roosevelt got on board and would approve the creation of the Federal Commission, the Roberts Commission, to cooperate with the War Department to protect cultural treasures, gather information about damage to such treasures, compile data on cultural property, and encourage resolution. This was a pioneering group of civilians who crossed the physical frontier of war and the frontier to preserve and return art. The members worked with the U.S. military, museum officials, art historians, and international commissions. They also wrote and distributed handbooks and created maps outlining historical monuments to avoid being bombed and destroyed. The Allies invaded Sicily in July 1943. It would be the first time monuments officers would have a chance to do their job. They had to salvage and write reports of missing works of art, instead of being proactive in saving them first.
The monuments men would have to make their way across the continent, hunting down secret locations where the Nazis stored their stolen treasures.
The art enthusiasts willingly volunteered to go overseas and put their knowledge to use. Unconcerned with their own safety, the MFAA crossed the frontier to protect and preserve cultural treasures in war-torn places, never questioning whether it was worth the risk. They did not have training, they were not soldiers, they were green, but it did not matter to them. Saving humanity's cultural treasures is what mattered. Monuments officers had support. Robert Edsel stated that General Eisenhower would issue a directive that placed the responsibility of protecting cultural property squarely upon the shoulders of every commander and in turn every officer and every soldier. There would be numerous occasions in which the monuments men and women would find mines, shias, castles, or even caverns that contained the Nazi loot. In all instances, the mission was to preserve and return art to its original owners. A new frontier in cultural treasure in war resolution was the goal, not trophies of war.
Established the philosophy, the policy that we would not take the spoils of war for us. We established for the first time in the history of civilization that we, the winner, would return the treasures to the rightful owner.
Of cultural heritage that was saved by unlikely soldiers crossed a frontier of art preservation that had never been witnessed before. James Romero's granddaughter stated that their legacy encourages us to look to the present and ask ourselves honestly if we are learning from the past or allowing history to repeat itself. The value of works of art to civilization is not limited by national boundaries. World War II was a military, racial, and cultural war, and its amazing group of untrained civilians went willingly into the war zone with no idea of protecting cultural treasures for the future generations. Most of the MFAA men and women went back to where they started before the war as regular civilians, historians, archivists, and professors. No great celebrations were held in their honor. Some received medals for their service, but most humbly went back to work and lived a normal life. One MFAA officer, George Stout, would carry on his quest to save art and cross another frontier, going into Japan after their surrender, and stated to safeguard these things will show respect and beliefs and customs of all men and will bear witnesses that these things belong not only to a particular people but also the heritage of mankind. Not all of the art was recovered. There still remains of tens of thousands of missing pieces. Governments around the world are still working on the resolution and recovery, but it is proving a difficult process in many cases. In December 1998, 44 countries agreed to the Washington Principles on Nazi confiscated art and set a goal to identify and locate and restore all looted artwork. Popular culture had brought awareness to the impact of the MFAA, made their selflessness and a courageous goal with movies like The Monuments Men and Women, and the goal to help bring awareness to art looted, lost, and what is still out there. There have been many wars since World War II, but there hasn't been any dedicated unit equivalent to the Monuments Men Fine Arts and Archives program, the MFAA. There have been many wars since the World War II, but there hasn't been any dedicated unit equivalent to the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives group. There have been some highly publicized art destruction in the modern area of the Iraq War.
Northern Iraq, it's part of our heritage and it's part of our concern, and we should care about those artifacts and that history because it's our history too.
The MFAA had limited resources and authority to locate, track down, and return than 5 million looted cultural items. The civilian volunteers crossed a frontier to put themselves in harm's way to help return stolen art to its original owner.